It was late, and the hospital was eerily quiet. I couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right as I walked through the long, dimly lit corridor. The white walls, the sterile smell in the air. It all felt wrong, almost too still. I've worked in hospitals for years, but tonight felt different. That evening, I was assigned to a night shift in the old wing of St. Catherine's, a part of the hospital that had been closed off for renovation for over a decade. Yet here I was standing at the threshold of it. My name is Aaron, and I've seen a lot of strange things in my career, but nothing like this. As I was making my way to the nurse's station, I noticed the doors to room 13 were wide open, even though it wasn't on the schedule to be used. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to check it out, despite the warnings I'd heard from some of the older staff. "Don't go near that room, it's cursed," they'd say. But that didn't stop me. I thought they were just old superstitions. As I pushed the door open, a wave of cold air hit me. The room was abandoned, save for a few dusty, old pieces of furniture and a rusted metal bed frame that had clearly seen better days. But something felt off, very off. There was a feeling in the air, something I couldn't explain. And then I saw it. Patient chart on the floor. It was from the early 1980s. The name on the chart was Amanda Carrington, and it was marked as deceased. But why was it here? I bent down to pick it up when I heard footsteps coming from down the hall. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was late, far too late for anyone to be walking the halls. My first instinct was to hide, but I couldn't move. As the footsteps grew closer, I heard a low whisper from the darkness. "Get out of here." It wasn't a voice I recognized. The temperature dropped even more, and I felt a cold hand graze my shoulder. I turned around, but there was no one there. Panic set in as I backed away from the door, feeling trapped. The air was thick with an energy I couldn't explain, as if something was watching me. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and I heard a strange noise, a faint scratching, like nails on the walls. Then, from the corner of the room, something caught my eye. There was a shape barely visible in the dim light, a figure hunched and twitching. It moved toward me. Without thinking, I bolted down the hall, not daring to look back. I could hear the figure following, its footsteps echoing behind me, getting closer and closer. But when I turned a corner, there was nothing there. The hall was empty. I rushed to the nearest exit, but as I stepped outside, I looked up at the sky. It felt like something had just crossed the line between the living and the dead, and I had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as I got into my car, I saw something in the rearview mirror, just for a split second. Amanda Carrington, standing in the distance, her eyes wide and hollow, staring right at me. I didn't go back to that hospital after that night. I never could. This story is real. And if you ever find yourself near St. Catherine's, remember, some rooms should never be opened. It's been 2 weeks since that night, but the images still haunt me. I can't seem to escape the feeling that something is following me. Every time I close my eyes, I see Amanda, her pale face, those hollow eyes, like she's lurking just beyond my vision. I thought I could shake it off, but every night, the nightmares get worse. And now it's getting personal. I tried going back to my normal life, ignoring the whispers of the other nurses about the haunted wing. But I couldn't. I couldn't let go of what happened in that room. It was driving me mad. So, I called in a favor from an old friend of mine, Dean. He's a local paranormal investigator, and though I didn't really believe in ghosts before, something told me I needed to find answers. We met up at a bar one night, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him everything, about Amanda, the chilling whispers, and the feeling that something was still watching me. He listened, nodding thoughtfully as he took notes. I could see he was intrigued, maybe a little excited. It's his job to investigate these kinds of things, but even he seemed unsettled when I mentioned the name Amanda Carrington. Dean had done some research before we met, and apparently, Amanda's story was no urban legend. She wasn't just another ghost. According to the records, Amanda Carrington had been a patient in St. Catherine's during the early 80s, diagnosed with a severe mental illness. She had been placed in that very room, room 13, after a violent episode. The doctors had tried everything they could, but she passed away under mysterious circumstances, her death ruled as an accident, though no one could explain how. But that wasn't the weirdest part. Dean told me that the hospital had a long history of paranormal activity. Over the years, many staff members and patients had reported strange occurrences. Voices in empty rooms, objects moving on their own, and the unmistakable feeling that something wasn't quite right. Room 13 had been sealed off for years after Amanda's death, but before that, it had been a revolving door for patients who didn't leave in the same way they came in. Dean suggested we visit the hospital at night, armed with his equipment, infrared cameras, EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recorders, the whole setup. I didn't want to go back, but my curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know more about what happened in that room, about why Amanda's ghost seemed to be following me. We arrived at the hospital at midnight. The place was dead silent, except for the wind whistling through the cracks in the building. As we approached room 13, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was as if the room itself was alive, pulsating with some kind of unnatural energy. Dean set up his cameras while I stood by the door, trying to steady my breath. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the air, fogging up the dimly lit hallway. Dean's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "We're getting some strange readings. The electromagnetic field is spiking. I've never seen anything like this." Before I could respond, we heard it. A soft shuffle of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from within the room. It was like someone was walking around in there, but there was no one else around. I could feel my heart racing as Dean motioned for me to stay quiet. He stepped into the room, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. That's when it happened. The door slammed shut behind us. We were locked in. I scrambled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear something, or someone, breathing in the dark, in the far corner of the room. A faint whispering started, a voice that I recognized. It was Amanda's. But then, something else happened. Something that made my blood run cold. A shadow moved across the wall, stretching long and unnaturally. The shape was humanoid, but it didn't quite look human. It was contorted, twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And it was coming closer. I wanted to scream, but no sound came from my mouth. I was paralyzed, locked in place by fear. The shadow reached out toward me, its fingers stretching, elongating in the darkness. Dean's voice broke through the tension. "We need to get out now." But before we could even react, the shadow lunged. In that moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was outside the hospital, gasping for air, my hands trembling. Dean was next to me, but he looked different. His eyes were wide, filled with terror. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The hospital, St. Catherine's, was never meant to be disturbed. Some things are better left forgotten. Some things, some spirits are not meant to rest. We barely escaped with our lives, and I don't know how much longer I'll be safe. The feeling still lingers, that cold breath on the back of my neck, the whispers in the darkness. Something is still in there, and it's waiting. It hasn't finished with me yet. It's been another week, and I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. The nightmares have intensified, and now they're not just confined to sleep. They've followed me into my waking life. At first, I tried to pretend I was just overreacting, but then things started happening. Things I couldn't ignore. One morning, I woke up to find strange scratches on my arm. They weren't there the night before, and they were too deep to be self-inflicted. The skin was raw, like something or someone had dragged its nails down my skin. I thought it could have been a sleepwalking accident, but deep down, I knew better. The worst part? Every time I close my eyes, I see Amanda's face. The hollow eyes, that twisted expression on her face. It's as though she's waiting for me, watching me, her presence always there, lurking just out of sight. Then came the phone calls. At first, it was just a few missed calls from unknown numbers. I thought it was a prank or something harmless. But when I listened to the voicemail, my blood ran cold. It was Amanda's voice, faint and distant, like a whisper, but unmistakable. She kept saying the same thing over and over again. "You can't escape me. You're mine now." I deleted the messages, hoping to get rid of it, but the calls kept coming. At all hours of the day and night. I tried blocking the number, but that didn't stop her. The calls didn't even come from a phone number anymore. They just showed up as private number, and every time, I could hear her faint whispers on the other end. By this point, I was spiraling. I couldn't go to work, couldn't sleep. Every time I turned on a light, I felt like something was watching me. Something was following me. But it wasn't until last night that I truly understood how far this thing had gone. I was sitting in my living room, trying to read a book to distract myself. But I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, the darkened space at the end of it. Every time I glanced in that direction, I felt the unmistakable presence of someone standing there. But every time I looked closer, there was nothing, just shadows. It was almost 2 a.m. when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. My heart began to race. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but when I looked at the screen, I froze. The time on my phone was 3:15. I had just looked at the clock, and it was 2 a.m. a moment ago. I'd lost an hour just like that. I tried to shake it off, but then I heard the whisper again. "Aaron." It was her. I knew it without a doubt. Her voice echoed from the hallway, soft and menacing. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. I stood up, forcing my legs to obey. I walked cautiously toward the hallway, but there was no one there. The footsteps had stopped. The whispering had stopped. But as I passed by the closet, something caught my eye. The door was ajar. I slowly reached for the handle, my hand trembling. The door creaked open and my blood ran cold. There, lying in the corner of the closet, was an old, yellowed patient's chart. It was from St. Catherine's. The name on the chart? Amanda Carrington. It was her chart again. How the hell did it get here? It didn't make sense. I had burned the last one. I hadn't told anyone about it. But there it was, sitting in the corner, as if it had always been there. I could feel my mind unraveling. My eyes locked onto the chart, my heart racing. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. It wasn't just a shadow. It was her, Amanda, standing in the corner of the room, her face distorted, her hands reaching out toward me, her eyes wide and lifeless. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And then she moved. I couldn't react fast enough. She was on me in an instant, her cold, clammy hands grabbing my arms, pulling me toward her. Her breath was like ice on my skin. The air turned frigid. I screamed. I struggled. I tried to break free, but it was like she was made of something else, something not quite human. Her grip tightened, and I could feel her dragging me into the dark, pulling me toward the closet, toward the shadows. And then, just like that, everything went silent. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor of my living room, gasping for air. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was drenched in sweat. I could still feel her touch on my skin, her cold fingers gripping me. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was a hallucination, if I was just losing my mind, or if she really is out there. But I know one thing for sure. Amanda Carrington is real, and she's not going away. I don't know how much longer I have before she finishes what she started. But if you're reading this, if you're listening, heed my warning. Some things, some spirits are not meant to be disturbed. And once you've crossed the line, there's no going back. It's been 3 days since that last encounter, and I haven't slept a wink. My body is exhausted, but my mind is a constant whirlwind of fear. Every time I close my eyes, I see Amanda's face. Those hollow, dead eyes, staring at me from the darkness. But now something's different. It's not just the visions or the nightmares. I feel her presence, creeping into every part of my life. The whispers have started again. Soft at first, barely audible, but growing louder each day. Every time I enter my apartment, I feel it. The chill in the air, the oppressive weight of something watching me. It's as if she's always just behind me, breathing down my neck, waiting for the right moment to strike. Last night, I decided to get out of the apartment. I couldn't stay cooped up any longer. I needed to clear my head. I went for a walk around the block, hoping the cool night air would help. But as I walked past the old church near my building, I heard something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A woman crying. I turned toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. It was coming from an alley just behind the church. The sound was so real, so raw, that I couldn't ignore it. I had to see who it was. As I stepped into the alley, the crying grew louder, echoing off the walls. I couldn't see anyone at first, but then a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a woman, hunched over, her face obscured by her long, tangled hair. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking with each breath. I froze. Something was off about her, something deeply wrong, but I couldn't look away. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to her, as if I had no choice but to approach. I took a tentative step forward. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. She just kept crying, the sound growing louder, more frantic, more desperate. I took another step, and that's when she turned toward me. Her face was twisted, contorted in agony, with hollow eyes that were too wide, too empty. Her skin was pale, stretched tight over her bones, like a mask that didn't fit. Her mouth opened, and I could hear her whispering, just below the sound of her sobs. "Help me, please, it's not over." And then, with a sickening jolt, I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't a woman. It was Amanda. She smiled at me, her mouth stretching unnaturally wide, the corners of her lips cracking as her eyes gleamed with malicious intent. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. No, this isn't real," I whispered to myself, but the words felt hollow. But Amanda's smile never faltered. She didn't need to speak anymore. I could feel her thoughts, her hatred, seeping into my mind, pushing me to the brink of madness. And then, just like that, she was gone, vanishing into the darkness like smoke. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make this stop. But the terror inside me had only grown deeper and darker, like a living thing clawing at my insides. I ran back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. I'm not sure what happened out there. Was it a hallucination? Was it real? I couldn't tell anymore. But one thing was clear. Amanda isn't just confined to St. Catherine's. She's out here with me wherever I go. She's in my mind, in my life, and there's no escape. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. And then, this morning, I got another voicemail. I couldn't bring myself to listen to it at first. I've been avoiding the phone calls, but I couldn't stop myself this time. I played the message. It was Amanda's voice, faint and distant, but chillingly clear. "You can't run from me, Aaron. I'm inside your head now. I've been inside you all along." I don't know what that means. I don't know what she's doing to me, but I can feel her presence growing stronger, pushing me closer to the edge. I went back to the hospital today against my better judgment. I had to. I needed answers. I walked through those halls, the same ones where I had once seen Amanda's ghost. But this time, things were different. As I approached room 13, the door was open. I stepped inside, and the temperature dropped instantly. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Dark, abandoned, filled with the stale scent of decay. But there was something else now, something that wasn't there before. Faint, rhythmic sound. I followed it, stepping deeper into the room. And there, on the floor, I saw it. An old yellow journal, covered in dust. It had to be Amanda's. I opened it cautiously, and as I flipped through the pages, my heart sank. The words were twisted, scribbled in a frantic, spidery handwriting. But the thing that caught my attention was the last entry, written in thick, dark ink. Asterisk, "I will never leave. You'll never escape. I'll always be with you, Aaron. Forever." Asterisk, and in the margins, there was one word underlined over and over again. Eternal. I don't know what to do. I don't know how much longer I can survive this. Amanda is getting stronger, and I'm starting to wonder if this is what she meant. If I've already lost, if she's already inside of me. But there's one thing I know for sure. I will never escape her. And now, neither will you. I didn't think it could get worse, but I was wrong. Every day since that last entry in Amanda's journal, the line between what's real and what's not has blurred. I can't tell if it's the terror or the exhaustion that's messing with my mind, but things are getting more intense. That night, after reading her journal, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even bring myself to go near the bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amanda's face. Those hollow eyes, that twisted grin, her cold fingers brushing against my skin. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something, anything, to stop this madness. I reached out to Dean. I figured if anyone could help me, it was him. I told him everything. About the journal, the voices, the shadows, the way Amanda had followed me out of the hospital and into my life. I could hear the concern in his voice, but there was something else too. Something I didn't quite catch at first. A hesitation, like he knew something he wasn't saying. But he promised to come over that night to help me. When he arrived, I showed him the journal. He took one look at it and his face went pale. "This is bad, Aaron," he said. "Really bad." I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer right away. He just kept flipping through the pages, his expression growing more and more grim. Finally, he set the journal down and looked at me. "Amanda Carrington wasn't just a patient at St. Catherine's," he said. "She was part of something darker, something I never thought would resurface." I could feel my pulse racing. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. Dean looked over his shoulder as if making sure no one else was listening. "There are things in that hospital, things in that room, that aren't just spirits. Amanda's death, it wasn't an accident. She was part of a ritual, a twisted experiment they were running in the 1980s. The doctors, the staff, they were trying to manipulate the very fabric of life and death. They were trying to open a door between the living and the dead." My blood ran cold. This was so much worse than I had imagined. Dean continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "What they didn't understand was that when you try to play with those forces, when you try to tamper with things that aren't meant to be touched, you invite something much worse. Something ancient. The kind of thing that doesn't just haunt a place, it haunts people. It attaches itself to them. That's what happened to Amanda. That's what happened to you." I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "What do you mean? I didn't do anything. I didn't sign up for this. This isn't my fault." Dean stood up and started pacing. "No, it's not your fault, Aaron. But the thing is, when you interacted with her, when you went into that room, you opened the door. You're marked now. She's inside your head, inside your soul. And she won't stop until she has you completely." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to say. My world had already fallen apart. And now this? Dean looked at me, his eyes full of pity. "I've been researching this kind of thing for years. I've seen it before. People getting marked by spirits, drawn into their world. I've heard stories about people who survive this, but not many. And those who do survive, they're never the same again." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What do we do? How do we stop her?" Dean didn't answer immediately. He stared at the journal, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "There's a way, but it's dangerous. The only thing that might break the bond between you and Amanda is a ritual, a cleansing, but it's not something we can do on our own. We'll need help. People who know how to handle this kind of thing." I felt a surge of hope, mixed with dread. "Who do we need? What do we do?" Dean looked at me, his expression darkening. "I'm going to need to call in some specialists, people who deal with entities like Amanda. But we need to act fast. Every moment we wait, she gets stronger. She's already inside your mind, Aaron. You might not even realize it, but she's changing you, little by little. And if we don't act soon, she'll take you completely." I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was sinking into a nightmare, with no way to wake up. The fear, the cold, the whispers, they were always there. I could feel Amanda's presence, like a suffocating fog, closing in on me. But I didn't have a choice. If there was even the slightest chance of getting out of this alive, I had to follow through. Dean promised to make the calls and set up the ritual. He told me to prepare myself for what was to come, that it was going to get worse before it got better. I didn't understand how it could get any worse, but I didn't ask. Couldn't. That night, as I sat in the silence of my apartment, I felt something shift in the air. The temperature dropped. The whispers started again, but this time, they weren't faint. They were clear. "You can't escape me, Aaron," the voice said, and I knew, without a doubt, that Amanda was right there in the room with me. And then the lights flickered. I tried to move, but I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing, my limbs numb. I felt something cold wrap around my chest, tightening like a vice. I heard the floor creak beneath me, the sound of something moving closer. And then I saw her, standing in the doorway, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. There was no escaping now. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming next. But one thing was certain. This nightmare wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And Amanda, she wasn't going to let me go. Not ever. The air was suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in around me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Amanda stood in the doorway, her twisted form still and silent. But her eyes, those dead, hollow eyes, were fixed on me. She smiled, that grin stretching impossibly wide, the skin at the corners of her mouth cracking like it was made of paper. Couldn't look away. My body was frozen, as if every nerve had been paralyzed by the sheer force of her presence. And then, in that horrible, quiet moment, her lips parted, and her voice filled the room, soft and chilling. "You belong to me now, Aaron." My heart pounded in my chest. The whispers, the voices, I had heard them all along, but now they were louder, clearer, coming from every direction. "You belong to me." I shook my head, trying to push the words out of my mind, trying to escape. But it was as if the room itself was alive with her rage and hunger, with the same twisted energy that had bound me to her in the first place. And that's when I realized it wasn't just her that was here. It was something else, something worse. The darkness in the room seemed to breathe, like it was alive, crawling along the walls, wrapping itself around me, suffocating me. It was as if the very air was turning into something vile, something that could no longer sustain life. My body trembled uncontrollably, my thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. My mind was no longer my own. But then, through the chaos, I heard Dean's voice, faint at first, and then growing louder. "Aaron, don't give in. You can fight this." I remembered his words. "You're marked, but you can fight it, Star." I remembered what he had said about the ritual, the cleansing. But now, standing in the room with Amanda, it seemed impossible. How could I fight something like this? How could I fight her? But I had to try. In a burst of desperation, I forced myself to move, pushing through the weight of the fear, the paralyzing terror that gripped me. I ran as fast as I could, past Amanda, past the suffocating darkness, straight out of my apartment and into the cold night air. I had to find Dean. I had to find the people he was calling, the specialists who could help me. There was no other choice. I barely made it out of the building, my legs trembling with exhaustion, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The night air hit me like a slap to the face, but it didn't feel real. The world didn't feel real anymore. Felt like I was walking in a nightmare. Dean's phone rang once, twice. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I ran to his house. I didn't know where else to go. He had to be there. He had to be able to help me. But when I reached his front door, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door was wide open. I stepped inside cautiously, my heart racing, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The lights were off. The silence was absolute. "Dean," I called out. My voice trembled. There was no response. I stepped further in, the floor creaking beneath my feet. And then I saw it. Dean's body. He was lying in the middle of the floor, his face frozen in a twisted expression of terror. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, but there was no light in them, just an emptiness that sent a chill through my bones. And on the walls, written in thick, dark ink, "Eternal." I fell to my knees beside him, my chest tight with fear, my mind racing. What had happened? What was happening? How had Amanda gotten to him? I didn't have the answer. I didn't have anything left. I had failed. I had let her in, and now she was everywhere. She was in my mind, in my thoughts, in my skin. And she had taken Dean. She had taken everything. But then, as I sat there, staring at Dean's body, the whispers began again. "You're next, Aaron." I looked up, and there she was, Amanda. She wasn't standing in the doorway anymore. She was standing in front of me, her eyes locked onto mine. Her mouth opened, and I could see her smile, a dark and twisted thing, full of satisfaction. I couldn't fight anymore. I was too weak, too lost. She stepped closer, her cold fingers reaching for me. I felt them touch my skin, and it was like ice sinking into my bones. There was no escape. But just before she could grab me, I heard something, a sound, a low, guttural noise, like something heavy falling to the floor. Then the door slammed shut behind me, and the room went dark. I don't know how long I stood there, hours, minutes, but when the darkness finally lifted, Amanda was gone. The room was empty, the silence was absolute, and I was alone. I left Dean's house that night. I left everything behind. I'm still running, still trying to escape, but I don't think I'll ever outrun her. I don't think anyone can. Amanda Carrington isn't just a ghost. She's something worse, and she will never let me go. If you're reading this, just know one thing. She's coming for you too. She's always watching, and there's no escape.